Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon for uh, panel evaluators and listeners who are watching my presentation, my slot today. Without further ado, I would like to present my paper, which is Malaysia's Case of Humanitarian Diplomacy in Afghanistan, investigating the prominence of humanitarian diplomacy as a tool of statecraft. So my paper is actually an extract or a combination of few subchapters from which I gather from my PhD draft thesis. I'm currently in second year doing PhD in UMS. So first we go to the definitions. Yeah? What is humanitarianism? It is an active belief in the value of human life, whereby humans practice benevolent treatment and provide assistance to other humans in order to better humanity. So, humanitarianism is done for the sake of the entire humanity, not just for a particular community. That is welfare, that is different. When we talk about humanitarianism, it is about global humanity. So, international humanitarianism refers to the general sentiment of international solidarism and sense of obligation. So, two keywords: solidarism and obligation to protect vulnerable populations across sovereign boundaries. So, it involves a movement, an NGO, or even a government sponsored organization in country A assisting vulnerable populations in country B. So it involves transboundary solidarity and commitment, usually or especially given in times of disasters, both natural disasters and man-made disasters. So over the last 3 to 4 decades, we have seen more and more man-made disasters, war, conflict, famine, and so on. Lately, people have been talking about climate change, which brings about many adverse effects, uh, droughts, frequent floodings, and with that comes the problems of refugee and food shortage, lack of food security, and so on. So humanitarianism emerged as partly to assist and answer on behalf of the humankind. So this humanitarianism, especially the international one, gave rise to humanitarian diplomacy, which involves activities carried out by humanitarian institutions and personnel as a distinct form of diplomacy. It is a distinct form of diplomacy, which is different from traditional diplomacy. Traditional diplomacy focuses on building cordial relationship between countries, whereas humanitarian diplomacy focus on delivering aid with minimum what we call it obstruction from political entities, from the conflict belligerent sides. So humanitarian diplomacy seeks to facilitate the deliverance of aid and the mitigation of conflict. So it involves arranging for the presence of international humanitarian organizations along with the aid and provisions in a given country, involving negotiation to access areas which otherwise could not be accessed via traditional means. Monitoring assistance programs, promoting respect for international law and norms, supporting indigenous individuals and institutions, and engaging in advocacy at a variety of levels in support of humanitarian objectives. So these definitions can be found in a book written by many authors actually contributed to this book. The two names mentioned here, quoted here, Larry Minier and Hazel Smith, are primary editors to a book written under the sponsorship of United Nations. So in Malaysian context, When we say humanitarianism, we frequently imagine images and captions of NGOs and non-profit organizations doing charity abroad in Palestine, in Syria, in Indonesia, currently in Cianjur, and elsewhere. We seldom imagine people like diplomats or national statements or some politically well-connected people doing charity. We seldom imagine that. But actually, when we talk about humanitarian diplomacy, that is the things that are happening all around the world. So when I went through the volume of literature, textbook references, documentaries, and online lectures, I discovered that state-sponsored humanitarianism has become a growing form of statecraft. The state plays more and more prominent role in advocating and delivering humanitarian aid in collaboration with well-established NGOs. Some NGOs, humanitarian NGOs, they remain apolitical. For example, the Doctors Without Borders, MSF. While the others, you see, like in Malaysia, we have Mercy, we have the recently appointed Global Peace Mission Malaysia, which I will elaborate in the next slides. So this shift of humanitarianism away from a fragmented and uncoordinated exercise by NGOs towards something that is a state-sponsored, something that has become a tool of statecraft, this has given rise to a new form of humanitarian diplomacy. So my scope of study, first of all, this news. First, I encountered this news. Dato Azam is the chairman of Global Peace Malaysia. He himself is a long-time humanitarian activist. He previously was a primary activist of leader of Majlis Belia Malaysia, Malaysian Youth Council, and then he was appointed as president of ABIM, Malaysian Youth Islamic Movement, and then about 20 years ago, he was appointed as chief of or chairman of the Global Peace Mission of Malaysia. And then in 2021, he was appointed by the foreign minister as special advisor on matters of Afghanistan. So we see when the last internationally recognized government in Afghanistan fell and Taliban took over, many countries withdraw international recognition, diplomatic recognition from Afghanistan. So Taliban became an internationally unrecognized government of Afghanistan. But Malaysia, following that development, wanted to continue having a relationship with Afghanistan in an unofficial capacity. So the Malaysian foreign minister appointed Datuk Azam. So my scope of study was to study the role of what were the role of this special advisor, and then how did the special advisor collaborate with the people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not only the minister but the officials, the diplomats, the undersecretary, the desk officers, and so on. And with relations to GPM, the Global Peace Mission Malaysia, I investigated what were the GPM's role in assisting the Malaysian government humanitarian diplomacy. And based on what I discovered, how can we or I, as a researcher, deduce the benefits of humanitarian diplomacy in complementing traditional diplomacy? So, furthermore, I also came across track one and track two diplomacies. So I investigated and studied what these two terms means. and how does GPN and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can be placed, they can be identified in this under these two nomenclatures, track one and track two diplomacy. So my methodology was mainly qualitative. I went to conduct interview with the key people. I interviewed the chairman of the GPM himself. I interviewed the principal assistant secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, deputy undersecretaries in the Ministry of Defense. So all these people, I gathered information from them and deduced my observation. I also went through over 40 article journals, two PhD theses at least, and as I mentioned, online lectures and documentary analysis. So I summarize my findings as follows. So ostensibly, the special advisor's role was to assist the foreign minister in crafting and delivering Malaysia's state-sponsored humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. But implicitly at the same time, the special advisor was actually quote unquote taking over the role of official envoy. He was the unofficial envoy of Malaysia to Afghanistan. He talked with the new Taliban government to ensure that although Malaysia does not officially recognize the Taliban government, but Malaysia retains bilateral relationship with the country of Afghanistan and remain committed to help the people of Afghanistan who have been afflicted by decades of war. And the special advisor, Dato Azam just now, worked in synchrony with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials via the Office of Foreign Minister. While under Dato Azam, he has his own staff under the GPM movement. So these staffs built ad hoc committees at technical and working level with the MFA officers and diplomats. So GPM acted as a primary aid broker, gatherer of resources, contact builder. So Dato Azam mentioned he took about 6 months. In Afghanistan, he went to Afghanistan through Peshawar, Pakistan. He built grassroots contact in Afghanistan, the villages, the communities, the local leaders, all the way into the ministries, the newly established ministries under the Taliban government. So the work began 6 months, took place for 6 months. On 22nd February this year, 22nd February 2022, Malaysia finally sent uh, an aircraft loaded with humanitarian assistance and a number of GPM and MFA officials boarded that aircraft, came down in Kabul, Afghanistan, delivered the aid, and conducted a brief bilateral friendly encounter, I call. It was not a meeting, it was a friendly encounter. I can show some pictures of that meeting, of that encounter. So, yeah. So, as you can see, in this picture, Dato Azam is wearing the jacket here. Beside him is a Buddhist monk from Buddhist Light International Association, BLIA. So, Dato Azam organization GPM collaborated with BLIA, Buddhist Light International Association, and a number of corporate sponsors to gather, to organize, and to deliver the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. So Dr. Azam, like I said, unofficially represented Malaysia for this. So in this picture, you can see there was an exchange of prayer beads, tasbih we call it. So these Buddhist beads was exchanged with the Muslim prayer beads between Taliban and Buddhist leader, Dato Azam witnessed, and somewhere behind there were a number of MFA officials who witnessed this event and facilitated all the logistics and diplomatic clearance on behalf of Malaysian government. So those in turbans and robes here are the Taliban officials. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, with track two diplomacy, uh, track two diplomacy is a different from track one diplomacy. So our foreign policy has been consistently guided by communitarian values. Communitarian values, which means we care about people not only in our countries but people in other countries who may suffer persecution and violation of human rights. And these communitarian and normative values are tied with our Islamic identity because we are a prominent Islamic country, politically speaking. We are a founding member of OIC. Our first prime minister was the first chairman of OIC. And so our foreign policy is crafted around these pillars: Muslim country, prominent OIC country, communitarian values, and normative values, which cares a lot about the suffering of other people. So track one diplomacy essentially refer to the official diplomacy, whereas the track two diplomacy is somewhat discreet or semi-official. In the team, we may have official diplomats, but they do not serve under official orders. They more or less assist or collaborate with NGOs to pursue national interests. In this case, in Malaysia Afghanistan case, is the interest of Malaysia to keep Afghanistan as a friendly country, as a non-belligerent country to us. We don't want Afghanistan to be treated as our enemy, so we treat them with uh, a friendship gesture through the humanitarian assistance. So uh, this track two diplomacy can actually supplement track one diplomacy when it comes to a difficult situation like this. What I mean by the difficult situation here is we don't want to officially recognize Afghanistan, but we want to maintain friendship with the country of Afghanistan and to continue showing solidarity with respect to the sufferings of Afghanistan victims of various decades of war. So we gave them international humanitarian assistance. They were given in the form of mainly winter provisions, jackets, foods, and so on. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that it can be deduced that the role of the special advisor of Afghanistan is actually serves as an instrumental binding agent for bilateral relationship between Malaysia and Afghanistan, which for over 20 years we do not have accredited ambassador in Afghanistan. We never have. Last we had was only, we never have a dedicated ambassador in Afghanistan. Last we had only accredited ambassador from Malaysia's Malwakil in New Delhi. Our ambassador to India was accredited simultaneously accredited to Afghanistan, a simultaneous ambassador lah. And the special advisor on Afghanistan was an unconventional agent of diplomacy. He is an example of unconventional agent of diplomacy who galvanized Malaysia's humanitarian mission with state and non-state actors for the benefits of Ummah diplomacy. So as a quasi-official humanitarian agency as well, GPM acted as primary aid broker and gatherer, contact builder, groundwork planner, and primary agent of integration between state and non-state actors. And lastly, as an integral component of soft power, humanitarian diplomacy can supplement a country's lack of hard power. Malaysia is a small country. We don't have vast military resources. So soft power is very important. Humanitarian diplomacy is, what can I say, a subset of soft power, an important subset of soft power, which has become increasingly useful as a tool of statecraft. So with that, I will conclude my presentation here, and I open for the questions and answer session. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.